I am here today to speak about .NET MAUI. What is it? I heard from the organizers earlier that some folks in the user group are not, very well aware of it. So I'll give you a bit of a high-level intro, and then we'll go into talking about some more of the tactical things coming up. When is it going to be released, et cetera, et cetera. If you have questions at any point throughout, hit the chat. Go ahead and let me know what your questions are. If I don't get them right off the bat, we'll try to circle back at the end. But don't hold back. Go ahead and throw your questions down there, and we'll do our best. I will do my best to answer them. All right, forging ahead. So who am I? I don't want to assume that everybody knows who I am. So David Ortinau, I am a principal program manager at .NET, working on .NET MAUI. And I started back in '96. As children, we all had something in our homes probably that we started coding on, and I was horrible at it. It was some kind of version of BASIC, and I probably was doing some DOS, Zork type game. But my real career began after university, where my university degree is English literature. And I got into doing publishing, so desktop publishing, magazines, and then eventually websites, some e-commerce, media streaming, and things like that. Spent a lot of time in and around the Microsoft technologies, but I would never say that I was like a hardcore in the Microsoft ecosystem. I was always kind of around the edges. So I was using it on the server for ASP and SQL, and I was doing a bunch of interactive games, interactive portals, point of purchase, or museum pieces where you would interact with things with big old touch screens. And then there was this period of time where I left .NET and was doing a bunch of Rails and Python, Django, and PHP. I think PHP is still used today, isn't it? But then of course the iPhone came out, and heck yeah, I was all in on the iPhone. So was writing Objective-C, and then Android was there, so I was writing Java. But then I started my own company and was doing mostly web, but then as much as possible doing mobile applications. And then a friend said, hey, you really should look into this .NET thing. It's called Mono and MonoTouch, MonoDroid. So you can see back in 2011, dove headfirst, headlong into that. And really the code share across platforms was a huge attraction. And really I began to specialize in that. So I built a whole business around that. And I was doing startups, I was doing healthcare, enterprise applications for the Blue Cross Blue Shields of the world, a whole host of different types of applications. And then in 2017, I joined Microsoft. So I had been an MVP in the community, but the opportunity arose and the timing was right to join Microsoft and become the program manager for Xamarin Forms, which at the time I'd used a couple of times with success. But I actually wasn't a huge fan of it at the time. And the reason that I joined was because the community was so strong and so vibrant and growing that I was like, this seems like a really great opportunity to come and help the .NET ecosystem be successful with this product and help improve the product. And so here we are, 2022. Since 2021, been working on .NET MAUI. Of course, we keep Xamarin going, but really focused on understanding what customers and developers need from a .NET framework when you're building mobile, desktop, and especially cross-platform applications, and guiding the whole product along with a great team of other program managers, engineers, engineering leads, managers. We've got a fantastic team working on .NET MAUI, and I'm extremely excited about it because we're taking everything we've learned from those, if you go all the way back on my slides, 2011, but going way back, and all the things we've learned from delivering cross-platform applications to frameworks to developers to build applications and improving upon that. We've heard loud and clear what some of the biggest pain points are and what some of the largest value propositions are that we can capitalize on. So we're rolling all that into .NET MAUI, and we've got a whole roadmap ahead of us that's very exciting. And yeah, so if you ever have questions, if you just have a comment, I wish Microsoft knew this, or you are looking to rant at somebody about the product, that's me. please shoot me an email. I will do my very best to read and respond in a timely fashion. You can always hit me on Twitter or on, I guess, GitHub, but Twitter is probably the safest place to actually get something where I can see it. So that's my information on the screen. Use it. If you are wondering, should I do this? The answer is yes, you should do this. Please reach out anytime. All right, so what's going on from a high level, and this is, some of these things are going to be reiterated to you, especially if you've been in .NET presentations for any time in the past several years. But really, we view .NET as a platform for building anything, whether it's desktop web, cloud mobile, gaming, IoT, AI. And a key value proposition of what we've been doing since .NET Core and then .NET 5 and .NET 6 is unifying all the kind of fragmented pieces of .NET into a more cohesive and coherent developer experience, so that when you can go into a job interview or a company is looking for a framework to invest in, you can say that .NET is a skill set and a technology that is holistic for all of these needs. And you don't have to get into the whole, well, what is Xamarin? And then what is ASP.NET? And should I use Blazor or should I be using you can kind of get a more cohesive story. And it's not just a marketing story, but it's actually our technology is aligning. So from a unified development platform standpoint, NuGet for libraries and dependencies, Visual Studio, the whole suite of Visual Studio tools plus the command line, GitHub Actions, Azure DevOps, Azure Pipelines for building, all of these things fully supported for all the platforms, especially MAUI in this particular case. And we're all sharing the same .NET, the same base class library, the same runtime. And not just sharing it, not just that we're consumers of it, but MAUI is now a baked-in piece of .NET. It installs via the .NET installer with the workload mechanism that we now have that is now growing. And a lot of things that you're actually seeing come from .NET 6 and now .NET 7, which is fast approaching November of this year. Much of those updates and changes are being triggered by, driven by needs that we have brought to the table from a Xamarin to MAUI transition perspective. So it's exciting to see the evolution of the entire platform, the growth, because the ecosystem at large is doing super well. It's a really good time to be a .NET developer. Over 5.3 million active developers on Stack Overflow, #1 loved framework for several years in a row. Highest velocity of OSS projects out there. And we're doing some really exciting things specifically in the client application development space. And when I talk about that, I'm primarily speaking about MAUI and Blazor, and then ASP.NET, all the things that we're doing in that space and the projects and the experiments that we have around that. Looking back over my career and the things that have been successful and delightful to work with, I'm really excited about what we're doing in MAUI. It's really just the start of some great things to come. So .NET's a great place to be. And that's one of the reasons that we are bringing all the Xamarin tech into .NET and unifying it with the rest of .NET so that we can continue to build this ecosystem of the framework for building anything and a framework that everybody loves. So what is MAUI? Well, we're building .NET MAUI to be the most productive way to build native apps that perform great across any device, specifically running on Android, iOS, Mac, and Windows from a single code base. And so as we look at all the opportunities that we have and we talk to customers about what your needs are, whether it's a business owner or a lead engineer on the team, understanding what are the things that are going to help you the most, and then driving that into the product and building something that it makes you more and more successful with what you do. My dog's wandering around my feet right now, which you probably can't hear, but the pitter patter of the little Boston Terrier feet is kind of distracting. In case you're wondering why I keep looking at the ground. So let's talk a little bit about the architecture and as it relates to .NET MAUI. So as I mentioned, it's Android, iOS, Mac OS, and Windows. You can target one, you can target all. And you're primarily interested in your app code. This is where your user experience resides, where the majority of your app logic is going to reside. This is the piece that you typically hired to craft and create, right? So your app code, you can write once and it can run on each of those 4 platforms. But there's a bit of work to happen in between your .NET app code and those native platforms in order for all these things to wire up. Firstly, you need a runtime. So on desktop platforms, it's Core CLR. On mobile platforms, it's an optimized version called the Mono Runtime. But all of that shares the same base class library, all the same APIs that you come to, as we say, know and love. Surly Dev still uses the Kindle app on Lumia 720. I have a Lumia 1020 and I bricked it, which is really sad because it's the one with that giant camera on it. It looks so cool. So the same base class library. And then in order to interact with the platform APIs, we need .NET projections of them. So you may hear the term used, binding libraries or binding SDKs. And what this is a .NET facade in some cases that it represents the Android written in Java, iOS, usually Objective-C, but they now have Swift libraries. And it is invoking those native methods, and it's crossing that boundary, that interop, right? So we create the Android and the iOS, and that iOS also includes Mac OS and Mac Catalyst, which is a kind of a hybrid. And then we also have a .NET projection of the WinUI APIs from C++. So that's Windows App SDK, et cetera. And by virtue of having that, we can now use all of that directly from C# without ourselves having to do those interop gymnastics. And then, of course, the app code is primarily going to interact with .NET MAUI. So this is the multi-platform app UI. You're going to use MAUI if you want to build Android, iOS, Mac OS, Windows applications using .NET. And the Xamarin pedigree certainly is rooted more in the mobile space, and that is the technology we're bringing forward and building on top of. But we're also working to build a really great first-class, no doubt about it, it's the way you want to use a technology to build desktop apps approach. So that's where we're headed with MAUI. But you can see that where you want to work is all in your app code space. And there's quite a few layers between you and the native platforms. And so this is really where the value of .NET MAUI resides, in collapsing that complexity with a little bit of abstraction and hiding, but you can still always get to each and every one of those platform things that you might need to do. So you as a developer are not removed from it. It's just that you don't have to worry about it unless you want to worry about it. So what is in the box when you get to .NET MAUI? In other presentations, I have dozens of slides that go into this, but I wanted to be able to spend a little more time looking at some code and then taking some questions at the end. So I've collapsed it into this, tons of words on one slide. But you're going to get 40 plus UI controls, whether they're collection views and lists and table views for throwing tons of data on the screen. You're going to get all kinds of layout controls, whether it's a Flexbox inspired Flex layout or grid control, which is super powerful, similar to a grid control you might have experienced in WPF in WinUI. But all these layouts are adaptive. So whether you're building for a specific screen size or you're building a desktop application, which now in .NET MAUI supports multiple windows, and then you can build your own MDI, which is a multi-document interface inside of your UI, which we have some customers today writing their own. All of that stuff, it works within MAUI because we now have these very responsive layouts. We have a window concept now, which didn't exist in the Xamarin space. But we also give tons of priority to things like right to left for languages that require that. Accessibility is a big area that we've been investing in for quite a while now, but especially during this transition to .NET MAUI. We have a panel of customers that care deeply about accessibility that we talk to on a regular basis. Our engineers interact directly with them and work to improve accessibility. One of the most exciting things about MAUI is how we have taken the Visual Studio .NET project system and SDK style projects with multi-targeting. And we've been able to simplify a lot of things that typically would require more effort on your part to handle 4 different platforms. Things such as registering fonts, so you can have custom fonts to use, app icons, which are different on every platform, splash screens, different on every platform, images in general, having all the different densities of resolutions that you need for an image, being able to use SVGs and PNGs and JPEGs. All of that is super easy in a MAUI application using the new project structure, because it has the build actions needed to generate all those assets and register things for each particular platform. So that's really exciting, and I'll poke at that a little bit when I do some demoing. We have the new app builder model, which is part of Microsoft extensions, often called the host builder pattern. If you are an ASP.NET developer, Blazor developer, you're probably very familiar with this. But it's just a nice, concise, single place to register your dependency injection, configure your application, whether it's API services or device-based services for things like access to storage on the device, access to the photo library, access to the camera, all of those sorts of things that, maybe once upon a time you could just freely do that as a developer, but now you always have to run through permissions for all that sort of thing. All of those essential platform services are baked into .NET MAUI, so they're just a keystroke away for you to go access and utilize those. One of the other really exciting things that we've heard developers get jazzed about is Blazor integration. So you can take your existing Blazor components and then you can host them inside of a .NET MAUI application. It's all compiled .NET code. So there's really no like JavaScript interop bridging that needs to happen between the Blazor web view and your MAUI context when you're doing things like accessing the photo library, for example. All that stuff runs just right there within the .NET context, and then there's no server, there's no server being hosted within the application, et cetera. It's all .NET code. So it's a really exciting, different than hybrid type technologies that you may have seen in the past. And it allows you to essentially bring your Blazor web skills directly to building desktop and mobile applications. And you can always choose to use native UI, platform UI for, let's say pickers. Pickers are very specific on mobile platforms, especially, or date pickers for calendar controls, very specific to each UI toolkit. You can still use those platform UI controls, even though the majority of your UI might be within that Blazor web view using, divs and Blazor components. So tons of other things you see here on the screen. Many of those XAML features folks may not be completely aware of are available within .NET MAUI and have been available for quite some time inside of Xamarin Forms. But one thing I will say about XAML is that while we certainly love it and it's well supported and we have XAML Hot Reload that goes along with it, we also now have .NET C# Hot Reload. And so it'll be interesting to see how many developers opt for a C# first, C# only approach. We certainly know that other frameworks in the cross-platform ecosystem like Flutter and Dart have capitalized on the, hey, let me just write Dart code and don't make me do any XML-based markup. And some developers really like that. Both approaches are fully supported within .NET MAUI, and you can have at it. You are not required to use XAML at all. Nogginbox has a love-hate relationships with XAML. I hear that often, yes. Once you learn it, and you've mastered it, you're like, hey, I'm super productive in it. I definitely, personally, my personal opinion, do what makes you productive. The end result for you in your application is going to be pretty much the same. So it really comes down to your team and your team's productivity in terms of how you build your applications. More on the loving side. Nice. And if you do have experience with WPF and WinUI, while some of the naming will be a little bit different in Maui, a lot of the concepts are very much the same. So hopefully it will feel familiar enough to be at home and you can be productive with it. It's typically what we hear from developers. Before I leave this screen, a couple of other things that need a little explanation for you. Platform views and platform embedding. These are two features of Maui that I don't think many people even know exist. Platform views is, let's say that you have a view of a page within your application and you're running it on Windows, but you have a very specific Windows control, Windows only control that you want to use right in the middle of your XAML or right in the middle of your C# if you're writing in C#. Platform views allows you to do that. In your XAML file, you can just say, okay, WinUI : data grid. And you can pop that WinUI specific data grid right in the middle of all the other shared UI. And when that compiles and runs on Windows, you'll use that native Windows control. It won't render anything on iOS, Android, and Mac because it doesn't know anything about the WinUI data grid. So you'll have to replace it with something else there. But for the cases where you have a very specific control for a platform, platform views makes it really easy just to inject that into your application. And then platform embedding is the ability for you to have a platform application. So let's say that it's Android and iOS, and you really only have maybe one screen that you need to be shared completely between your applications. And you want to do all the rest of your work against Android widgets or against UIKit, as is the case for Apple. You can write all your stuff in UIKit for Apple, and then you can bring in that one component or that one page of Maui, and you can embed it into your application. Little different than XAML islands, which kind of get hosted in a context. These actually render out the native controls and the native layouts for that platform. So this is something that Xamarin Forms developers, especially those who care deeply about app startup performance and or had existing Android and iOS code bases written in the native frameworks, would use something like platform embedding. All right. So a little bit about what you're getting into in the .NET MAUI space. We do have a great ecosystem of component vendors. This list here represents those that have for years and years supported the Xamarin ecosystem. And many of them are already today supporting .NET MAUI with pre-release versions. So a couple that I'll highlight. DevExpress in particular has brought some of their controls and charting, validation for form editing, as well as a template generator extension for Visual Studio. And you can go try out their stuff for free at the link on the screen, which is probably hard to read, but if you just Google DevExpress and .NET MAUI, you'll find it. Progress Telerik has also been shipping controls since, gosh, almost day one of previewing .NET MAUI. And they have a beautiful data grid control, all these different charting controls, radial charts, things like that. And you can check out their information there. They also have quite a few blogs that are specific to Maui. And then they have some blogs that are about how you can use Angular with Maui, how you can use Blazor with Maui. And they have a suite of Blazor controls as well. And then Sync Fusion. One of the really interesting things to me about the Sync Fusion controls is that they've been rebuilding them according to their FAQ. And we do talk to them on a regular basis. I don't get all of my information just from scraping the FAQs. But they've been using the new Maui graphics library, which is going to be stable with .NET MAUI when we come to release. But what that graphics library is in the same way that Maui is an abstraction across the UI toolkits for each platform, the graphics library is an abstraction across all of the graphics rendering engines for each platform. And then backing that up, we also have a Skia rendering engine. So when you have a need to create UI for your app that is pixel perfect across all platforms, because Maui by default is going to give you the best UI toolkit for each platform that is consistent with the platform. So when you need that consistency across platforms to unify, the graphics library will be super helpful to you. And then you get to choose whether or not you want to pay a 5 megabyte or more Skia tax to use Skia because you can just use the native UIs. So that's what Syncfusion is doing here. So you can kind of see an example of it right there on the screen. A couple of demo apps that I'll point you to, and I'm going to dive into the code on this one here in just a second to kind of give you a tour of .NET MAUI. But this is the .NET Podcast app. It is, there are multiple clients for it. There is the server and the web API client, which uses minimal APIs, which is the new part of .NET 6. Then we have the Blazor web app, and then the Blazor desktop and mobile apps. Those are using Blazor to render the UI and deliver those experiences. And then we have the .NET MAUI Pure and the .NET MAUI Hybrid mobile and desktop apps. So no matter how, thank you, Aiden. No matter how you are thinking about combining these technologies or these approaches, these app models, they all work together. And this is a really good example for you to kind of explore how they all integrate. And then this is an application that we launched at Build last year, a weather app. Because who doesn't need another weather app sample, right? But we really like the design of it to show off some of the brushes, the linear gradients, the support of SVGs, the way we can do modern navigation paradigms like the left side button bar, and then the bottom tabs, and you can see that it's native for each platform. So probably some good examples for you of doing some more UI specific things here. As well as borders and frames and shadows, which are all fully supported in .NET MAUI so that you can really accomplish any UI you need to. All right, I'm going to come back to this slide. You can ogle at it here for a second, but I'm going to flip over and let's look at some code. So I'm going to start with a simpler application here. And I don't know if this is going to work. I'm going to try to zoom in. Did that actually zoom in for you all? It did. Oh, nice. And now you're getting dizzy because I'm scrolling all over the place. I'll stop doing that. All right. So within the solution, it's one project, right? And this is super awesome because typically in a multi-platform, cross-platform solution, you would end up with a Windows application project, a iOS project, an Android project, and then you'd have to figure out where to put all your stuff. So now we have one single project, and we have brought the platform-specific code into each of these subfolders. So if you were to build an Android application, you would, even if you were using Java, you would see that you get an Android manifest with some very Android-specific configuration things. You get an app activity and an application class. These are just C# projections of those native platform classes. You can drop any code that you need. Let's say that you wrote a service that is very specific to Android. You could drop that directly into the Android folder, and that would only get compiled for Android because we have build tasks in MAUI that will follow these folders and multi-target that code for those specific platforms. Similarly, there's an iOS folder, Mac, and Windows. So you may never need to go into that folder. I try to stay out of it. But sometimes when you do need to go to the platforms, that's a great place to be. And then we have a resources folder where you can put your fonts. Any font that I put in here is automatically going to get picked up for my application. I have an images folder where I can put SVGs, I can put PNGs, and these will all get compiled to the different densities required for the platforms that I'm targeting. And you have some level of configuration over those different sizes that you generate. If I have raw assets, I can put them here, text files, markdown files, HTML files, etc. And then I like to keep all of my styling in here as well. So this is a folder I created. Your default project isn't going to get these, but these are all resource dictionaries for different themes for my application, which is a simple calculator. All right, so that is the tour of that. And then I'm going to open up by way of, by the way, I didn't actually know I could do this until weeks ago. I can double click the project and that will automatically open up the CS proj for editing. I'm sure everybody else knew that, but I had been right clicking it and then trying to find, I never could find the edit thing. I mean, I could obviously, but it takes me longer. So things to point out in the CS Proj real quick. Target frameworks. So these are all the different frameworks that this particular project supports. If I strip out iOS, then it doesn't matter what's in that platform folder. It's not going to build for it. So this is really the first source of truth for what platforms my app targets. And then we have a conditioned out here for the Windows TFM. So if you hear people talking about TFMs, they're talking about target framework monikers. That's what that is. It's going to build me an EXE, and then I have a use MAUI true, single project true, and these two things are basically bringing the MAUI dependencies into my project and then enabling my project to use specific features of single project. That is the font and the image stuff that I'd mentioned, as well as the rules for multi-targeting, et cetera. And then there's some other information here, but I think the main cool thing to see is this right here. So all of my icons, I can specify simply with a background file, a foreground file, and then a background color. And that's going to generate icons like you see down here in my start menu, or the icons that you would see on your Android or iOS home screen. Jack, AKA Andrew Craig, asks, can you build just Android, or do all platforms get build whenever you build the project? So it is only going to build one TFM at a time. And in this particular case, I think I'm running Android. Yeah, I'm currently running Android, so it only built Android. And I'll show you the start menu here after I stop my app. There are additional optimizations, though, that we are going to be making to the project system to ensure that you have optimized builds so that you have the fastest developer inner loop. So there are a couple of other things here. So yeah, I get MAUI app icon. I get the splash screen, which is going to be generated based on these assets. If you don't like the simplicity, I guess, of these splash screens, you can go into each platform and use the platform's own way of doing splash screens. But this is going to take a lot of that pain away. And then MAUI images, you can see that a wildcard is being passed here. That means that any image that gets supplied or put into that folder will be included in my project, and I can reference it by name. And then fonts, you do not like that pain? I don't like it either. And then fonts, same thing. Any font that I drop into that folder is going to be registered with my application. There's one more step, though, that I need to do to make fonts super slick and useful. And I can do that in my MAUI program. So this is the host builder that I referred to previously. And this is where I can do a bunch of configuration for my application. This is a super simple one. So all I'm really doing is saying, hey, this application is going to use MAUI, and I want to make sure that you know about this particular font. If I don't do this, I can still use this font, but I have to then do the gymnastics on each platform to figure out what the name of that font is, when it's on each platform, and what folder it got put into. Nobody wants to mess with that. So all you got to do is come in here. This is all we ask of you, is to give it a name. And then once you've given it a name, now you can use that font name when you want to use it. All right, so there's that. Let's talk about the entry path for the application, and then we'll click around and play with the application. So every MAUI app starts with the app class. So we have an application. The native platforms have their own entry points. Those entry points are going to instantiate this guy. Okay, so as far as where your code starts, you really think about this being the starting point. So my main page, I'm going to supply it with a main page. I mentioned that we do support multi-windows. I'm not going to cover that today. That does change things a little bit for you because now you have multiple windows, et cetera. But for the purposes of this is your entry point. And then my main page, My app, in terms of styling, I'm going to supply it my styles like this. I showed you all those different styles that I had, and I'm going to run the sun theme style today. And then my main page is this right here. There's a couple cool things inside of Visual Studio that you should be taking advantage of. One is the live visual tree. So, you know, XAML is notorious for being verbose, right? So who wants to read all of that and figure all that out? Well, in here in the live visual tree, when I'm in a debug hot reload session, I can come in and I can see everything that's in this page. So at the top level, I can click this and navigate to it. I have a grid. My grid has 7 different rows. It's got 4 different columns, and I've given it a name. And then I've got images, and I've got tons of buttons. And I can click this little guy right here and go directly to that content. Very useful for figuring out what is going on. And then I have a property panel over here on the right side where I can then come in and do some work against each of these controls. But you haven't even seen this app yet, and you're wondering, what does this calculator even look like? I'm glad you asked. So here is the Android version of this. And I've done some styling on it. And one of the things I always loved about calculators is that I can type in something like this, and then I can turn my calculator around. And when I turn it around, you can read it, right? So that's my new Hello World demo. I'm amused. I hear everybody clapping and laughing. So this XAML Live preview, though, is very, very useful because let's say that I have some kind of an alignment problem, which I don't actually have. Thank you. Oh, I don't know. Does that one say boobs? In my junior high school days, that would have been great. Thank you. Thank you for the claps. I can use these guides, which that one doesn't show up super well. Let's see. Give me a color. Well, black actually might show up better. Here we go. So I can set up guides, and then I can say, okay, am I actually aligning all of these buttons properly? And then I can zoom in on it, and I can make sure I get right up against that pixel. And then I can go down and say, okay, yeah, my alignment looks good. All right, I'm happy with that. Same thing with horizontal. Now, something that is not yet working in this version of Visual Studio, but it will be in the next version of Visual Studio. Drum roll, please. I will be able to select this puppy here, select element. I can check that, or I can click it, and then I can click on all the visual elements in my UI, and I can inspect them directly. Super exciting. I'll be very, very happy to do that. Yes, that is boobs. Thank you. Actually, so just to show you my code, I was going to demo the C# hot reload for you, but my build, I broke it, so I can't do that for you. But what I did in this app, I was very amused with myself. I went and found all those blitz words for whatever they are supposed to say. And the thing is, you really have to have a font like the one that I used, right? If you don't have a digitized font like this, that doesn't actually end up looking always like the word. All right, that's enough. That's enough of that. So let's look at something that's a bit more complicated. And I'm going to go to another application. So this is the podcast app, and I do actually have this running too. So I'm currently running the Windows version. Make that a little bit bigger. And this live preview is very useful for situations like this where I'm only showing you one screen, right? Because otherwise I would have to go to my other screen, and then I could bring it all the way over here and show it to you, and then I have to scrape it off the screen again and come back. But in this application, we're doing quite a bit more setup in that MAUI program, which I think is worth looking at. So this is the MAUI program.cs. It is doing some things such as configuring essentials, registering the Blazor MAUI web view. It is configuring multiple fonts so that I can reference them all by name. in my styles. And then it configures services. And let's look at the configure view models. So ignore the fact that the first, I don't know, 8 lines here are not actually view models. This was because of a change in preview 14. And so I didn't feel like creating a new class 5 minutes before the presentation, and I just jammed them in here. I think everybody can appreciate a write the code to get it done approach, right? It is the 80s again. So I can set up my inversion of control containers, my DI, all right here, singletons, transients, etc. And all of these are actually being applied to shell. So what is shell, I hear you asking? Shell is the container of the application that provides some navigation services and some navigation, desktop shell, and some navigation UI. So in this particular case, I have a flyout header with an image. And let's see here if we come back. It's that image right there. And let's see if hot reload's working for me. So to prove that it is, yep, there it is, it's gone. Just removed it. So that is the flyout header. The flyout is currently in the locked position. If I actually, let's see, what are my options here? Flyout, locked, and disabled. Now I've hidden it. And then the only way to get it back now is to click the hamburger. Everybody knows the hamburger. And then it opens. So if I want my UI to be like that, I can do it that way. But we like locked better, especially for desktop scenarios. All right. Other things in here. So the shell is super easy in that all I need to do is supply it with my content, and it's going to render out the navigation UI that I want. In this particular case, I'm supplying it titles and icons. I'm supplying it dark and light icons because MAUI supports app theming with dark and light modes. And then that's what's rendering this UI over here. So shell is very convenient for that. And then you also get URI-based navigation. And in this particular case, this application runs both on desktop and mobile. So let's take a quick look at that. I've got my Pixel 5 running, which I think is still debugging from the other Visual Studio. That's probably not a good idea. All right, so let's run that puppy. And you'll notice, I never did show you that. I did want to show you the full extent of this debug menu. So I can just pick a device and target that, or I can first pick the target framework, the TFM, and then narrow down to my devices. So if I have an iOS device plugged into my machine, I can access it here. If I have simulators because I connect to remote Mac, I can access it here. I personally have been developing almost exclusively against either the Windows machine or against the Android subsystem for Windows. Did you know you could do that? Did you know that your Windows 11 machine with the subsystem can be used as an emulator? It's pretty awesome. All right, so now that's running. Come back over here. So you can see now that my shell navigation moved to bottom tabs because that is the typical preferred navigation for, I'm trying to click on this like it's navigation. You can't do that, but I can come over to my emulator and I can click on it over here. Okay, so I'm probably going long. I don't even know how long y'all are going to let me go, but I am going to mention a few other things here and then I'll take some questions. So this together tab, this is actually loading up a Razor template. So let's look at that real quick. So this is listen together. The idea of this page is that you and a pal want to listen to the same podcast from different places, I guess. And so this will sync you up with them and you can both listen to the same podcast. So all you gotta do, super easy, is drop that Blazor web view control in here, point it to your host page, the root of what it is that you want to run, and it's going to load all that up for you. And then this root component is the shared Blazor component, listen together component. If I look at listen together component, which I believe, just want to look at this. Pages, yeah. So it's in the Maui Blaze namespace. It's this up here. I didn't write this application, so the fact that I can find any of these things is actually a testament to just how well this is architected, right? So these are the Razor pages that are rendering out the listen together UI, and as you can see, it's Razor, and this is all running inside of a Maui application. You can see that it's. I think I can do this because of the room. Jack is asking if Linux will be supported. It is not on our committed roadmap at this time. I will say that Linux continues to come up with real business scenarios, not just like to have, but actual have use cases for, which is important. And so we will seriously be considering it in the future. And we're doing market research now and customer reviews to understand the need for Linux better. All right, but I want to show anything else in the podcast app. How about y'all just go download and clone the podcast app? The link was in the chat, and you can check that all out. Cool. All right. So let's just talk for a second about upcoming milestones. We are shooting for a GA release of the .NET MAUI SDK in May. And the guidance that I think I would give at this point is it's best for new applications. At this point, if you have libraries that you maintain that are for Xamarin, for example, and you want to make sure they're compatible with .NET 6 and .NET MAUI, this would be a really good time to get rolling on that if you haven't already. Many libraries already have started. And then we also will be shipping the .NET Upgrade Assistant with support for transitioning Xamarin applications to MAUI, which I have some details on here in just a second. And then in June, thereabouts, we expect to start previewing .NET 7 releases of MAUI because the train keeps rolling, right? Our .NET 7 scope of work for MAUI is specifically to address feedback we get from the GA release, improve the product, right? And as you can see on the timeline at the bottom here, we do expect to start shipping service releases in June and then throughout all the way up until November. And then in November, we'll have another GA. We do have some key work that we're trying to accomplish in terms of platform interop and performance. And so you can follow along those details and see more information on themes of .NET, the website where we publicly post our roadmaps. The question, VS for Mac. I've heard it's a thing. So VS for Mac is underway. The MAUI related support for it, because like I said, I think earlier in the presentation, a lot of things that we're doing in MAUI is really at the forefront, tip of the spear for what we require tooling to do. And so we've put some pretty heavy demand on the tools. VS Mac is in the transition from GDK and other technologies that it used to use to being a fully native 64-bit Cocoa application using .NET macOS, which is a binding that we supply. And so the support for MAUI will be coming out soon. I wish I could give you dates, but I can't. They're iterating on it. Every day we're updating our internal builds and seeing how things work. I can tell you that it on a really good day, it works well. But there's a lot of things in flight that need to land in order for them to ship a preview at the quality level that it needs to be at. So I would say look for it in the next few months. I think the only thing I could say with stronger confidence is that by May GA, we will have a VS Mac that you can be using. All right, so I think I did have a slide here. If you're interested in migration and you have a Xamarin code base that you maintain and worry about, and you want to know how and what needs to happen to get this thing onto Maui, and do I even need to get it onto Maui? Here are some bullet points that will be of interest to you. I won't read through all of them. That's funny. I started writing the after upgrade tasks, and then I didn't actually fill out any sub bullets. So what are the after upgrade tasks? Well, you'll need to verify your layouts, verify your layout options, verify your colors, and make sure that all of those still appear and render as you expect. You should not need to rewrite your applications, but depending on how well you did your layouts, you may have more work than other folks. We were reviewing a code sample from a customer this morning, and there was extensive use of layout and expands. And that is a notoriously not well understood property. And so the layout did not do what the developer probably expected it to do. So there will be some changes like that, and we will provide guidance for as much of that as we possibly can. Hoyle asks, MVVM or MVU, is there a reference architecture for best practice? So I would say that if you're looking for a best practice today, then MVVM is going to be the way to go. There's going to be a lot more reference material on it. You can rely upon things like Prism, MVVM Cross, Fresh MVVM, and Mugen MVVM, and there's so many MVVM frameworks out there that will give you Rails that you can run your app on. You're gonna have a lot more support and well understood concepts there. Model view update, in terms of our stuff, you certainly can use it. There are a couple of projects out there that have implementations of it. I would say the most well-baked one is going to be Fabulous and Elm related frameworks for Fabulous. That is an F# based approach, so that's a little bit more of a hurdle. But that's the one that I know of that's been out there for the longest in the .NET community, and developers have been quite successful with if you can get into F#. Our Comet experiment, our Comet project from James Clancy does take a different approach to MVU. We'll continue working on that. If that's something that you're interested in, please check it out, like it, star it, and let us know what you think. It is tracking along the same trajectory as Maui in terms of versions and releases. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. Why not just use Shell instead of MVVM? Well, I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. You can do them both. And you may not need MVVM at all. You know, don't feel like you need to over-architect your applications. Best practices is very often in the eye of the beholder. And I've been doing software for a long time, and I've shipped some poorly architected but highly successful projects. So having a pristine architecture for your application does not guarantee success. Documentation is growing. Check out the documentation. 42 new docs appeared on Monday from Dave Britch, a fellow resident of the United Kingdom. Definitely get started today. We are in the preview channel of Visual Studio. We are not in the stable release channel yet. So until somebody tells you otherwise, and that somebody is probably going to be myself or Maddie, I almost said Lazier, Maddie Montequia, my coworker. Stick with the preview channels. All right, questions.